Hello everybody and welcome back to another episode of Minecraft Myth-Busting, episode number 70. Today is another episode of lag busting and we're going to be looking at mobs and seeing what kind of frame rate issues they cause in the game. Now before we get to that, I would like to let you know that these episodes do take a lot of time and effort to produce, and I've decided that I don't want to do these weekly anymore. I just want to take a little bit of a break, so if you don't see these episodes every week, that is exactly why. But let's get right into the topic. Today we're going to be looking at mobs, and what I'd like to do is to do all of the testing off camera. The reason why is that I found that recording while testing kind of slows me down a little bit, and there's a lot of testing that I want to do. So I'm going to let you know the kind of things I'm going to be looking for. So first of all, the complexity of the mob, I reckon, is going to affect the frame rate a little bit. So if we have a look at the slime right here, this guy is just a big old cube, isn't he? So it's not a lot for the computer to do. However, he is also transparent, so that might actually affect things. But if we compare that guy to the pig, you can see this guy right here has got a few more shapes that make him up. So this guy might be a little bit more intense for the computer, and that's probably only going to be when they're in large quantities, but we'll do all of that in our test world. So if we compare this guy to the blaze, you can see this guy's got particle effects, he makes noises, he's got some spinning and animated blocks flying around him, and there's quite a good chance that this guy is more complicated than this one for the computer to, make it appear on your screen. So that may cause some more frame rate issues when they're in large quantities. So that's one thing we're going to be looking at, the complexity of the mob, seeing if that makes any difference. As well as that, I also want to see if when they're all clumped together, if it makes much more of an issue than when the same amount are spread out over a space. And the reason that I want to test this is because a lot of mob farms tend to put the mobs into the same spot, and that might actually cause some sort of issues, but maybe not. We will find out. And then the other thing that I'm looking at the moment is mob armor. Now zombies, they can be their regular selves, or they can be wearing armor as well. And I've got a feeling the game is going to have to do some extra calculations to calculate all of that armor. So that is another thing as well. And then two more things I'm also going to look into is mob AI. I'm going to look at mobs when they're in the world with the AI on and when the AI is turned off, and see if that makes any difference. And they are the main things that I'm looking for at the moment. So now I'm going to go and do all of my testing, and I will get back to you when I have some important information. So you know exactly what I've been doing, and I haven't tested all of the mobs just yet, but of all the ones I've tested so far, there is something recurring here that is the same for every single mob. Now one thing I'd like to mention is that we have 900 guardians here, and it is different for different mob types. For example, with pigs you can have more of them in the world, whereas with blazes you can have less. So depending on the model of the mob and what it's doing, it does affect the frame rates like that. So anyway, 900 guardians, and it doesn't matter what mob it is, this thing always happens. We're standing back, we're at 30 FPS or just under, and when we move in to look at the mob, when we get in the range of sound, you're going to see the frames drop. So now we can hear the mobs, and the frames come right down to around 18. And sometimes when you move in even further like this, it goes down to about 14 or 15. But it seems to be when you go in range of their sound that all of a sudden the frame rates drop down. Now because of this, I turned off the game sound to see if that would make any difference, and it didn't. I also spawned in mobs that had no AI, so that means they would just sit there and not be moving. That made no difference either. Same thing again, you stand back, you get 30 frames per second, you move in and it lowers down. And then I spawned in a bunch of these guys that had a tag that made them silent, so they don't produce any sound even when your game sounds are turned on. And the exact same thing happened yet again. You could stand back 30 frames per second, you'd move in and they would drop right down. And so there was one other test that I did as well, and that was to remove the barrier blocks in there and spread these guys out, and it would be the same thing again. You can see we're getting around 30 FPS even though they're all spread out and moving around, and as soon as we get in range of their sound, it goes down. So even if sound is turned off, even if these guys are silent or they don't have AI, it doesn't seem to make a difference, which is really interesting stuff at this point. I've decided that we are going to redo all of our testing so far. Initially I was benchmarking these guys from a distance, and from the Guardians it was around 900 mobs to hit that 30 FPS mark, and when we come in closer it's around 600. Now this is important to do it this way, I think, because you're most likely to be in contact with large numbers of mobs like this when you're using a farm. And when you're using a farm you're going to be standing next to it and killing all of those mobs one by one. So this would be much more useful information, I believe, and that's the reason that we're going to change the benchmark. But for now I've got some footage of me testing with the blaze that I'd like to show you. So we have 350 blaze here, and as I move in, a few of them actually despawn, so it's slightly less. But you can see here what I'm showing you are the particle effects. As we move in, more of them load up and our frames get absolutely destroyed. We are down to 2 to 1 frames per second here, and that shows you how much of a strain it puts on the computer. But here's something else that's interesting. When you turn around and you go out of view of all the blazes and the particle effects, they're still loaded, they're still doing calculations and all of that stuff, and it's hurting your frames. So even though you're not seeing them on the screen, if you're in range of them, those particle effects are going to destroy your frames per second. So I benchmarked this at around 200 blazes for that 30 frames per second mark when they have the particle effects turned on, and when the particle effects are turned off, it's around 700 blazes. So now we are going to blitz through the test results. The numbers that I'm throwing at you are the amount of mobs it took us to get down to 30 frames per second. So the zombies, 650 of those. Then I threw in a villager, so all of their pathfinding AI kicked in, and this only hurt the frames a little bit, and I think this is because it's a controlled experiment. On an actual world, that would have probably made a much bigger difference. So next up we have the zombies again. This time they're holding swords. I wanted to test that out. Obviously the game has to render the swords, and that brought it all the way down to 500. So then I gave them some boots as well as swords, and that brought it down to 400. I gave them some chest plates and leggings, and that brought it down to 300, and then with a helmet as well, it was down to 270. So each of those things have to be rendered, and of course it's therefore going to affect the frame rates. So after that we did the creepers. There's 650 of those. I even tested around a little bit with throwing in some ocelots, putting some iron golems in the area, but it didn't really make any effect to the frames at all, and this is because of the creeper AI and running away from the ocelots, but it didn't seem to make much of a difference. Anyway, moving on to the chickens, we have 800 of those. We have 700 cows, 500 horses, 750 ocelots, 750 pigs, then we have 550 sheep, and I also did this with all of them being the same colour. It made absolutely no difference whatsoever. And then we have the mushrooms. It's 450 of these. Remember, these guys have the little mushrooms on their back, or mushrooms as it should be correctly pronounced, so the game has to do a little bit of extra rendering. Then after that we have squids. There's 500 of them right there. We also have villagers. This was around 700. And then it was rabbits with 500. Next up we have the Endermite. There are 850 of these guys right here, but my particle effects are turned off. So when I turned my particle effects on, they went down to around 750. So particle effects obviously make a difference. And also with these guys, when you move away by 16 blocks, they will no longer be displayed on your screen, which is interesting. So next we have the Enderman. There's 460 of them there, and when I turn off my particle effects, we can get up to 500. So some particle effects make a big difference, some don't, but this next demonstration will prove that. So we have 500 of them right here. These are Magma Cubes, and you can see their particle effects around the edge of the screen. And when we turn the particle effects off, we can go all the way up to 900. So the particle effects on those guys do actually make quite a big difference. So next up are the skeletons. There's 600 of them right here, and then I decided to give them all bows, and bows are, you know, quite a detailed object for a 3D one, and that brought it all the way down to 350 when they were holding those. So after that we have the cave spiders. There's 470 of them right here. Then we have regular spiders, around 500. We got the wolves with 650. Then we have zombie pigmen. There's 500 of those. Snow golems, 525. Iron golems, 410. And then we have the silverfish. There's 600 of these. And once again, when you move away by 16 blocks, like the Endermite, these guys will not be displayed on the screen. So next up, we have the ghast. There were 400 of these, and there was an old bug in the game that the ghast sounds would actually cause some issues. Now, wherever you go in a world where there's a ghast, you can actually hear it, as this clip will demonstrate, which is interesting. But I made these guys silent. I turned off my game sound, and it made no difference. It was around 400, would always be 30 frames per second. So the next one are the Elder Guardians. There's 500 of those. Then I tested the Wither Skeletons. There's around 600 of those guys. And note that these guys are not holding swords as well. And then moving on to the next one, we have slimes. That's 325 of those. As I pointed out earlier in the video, these guys are transparent, so I'm pretty sure that makes a big difference. You can kind of feel it when they're all jumping around. When there's a lot of jumping, then the frames go down a fair bit. But last of all are the witches. It just took 500 of these to bring us to 30 frames per second. So if you were wondering what the lag factor was in the bottom right of your screen, that's where we kind of compare the impact it has on the game to item frames, which we defined as a lag factor of 1. So the Witch is pretty similar to that, it's 1.02. So if you were to put down, let's say, 20 or 30 item frames in your world and you started to feel lag, then you know that 20 or 30 witches or so could possibly impact you in the same way. And of course, all of the testing that we've done is not scientific. This is how it works on my computer. You know, different computer stats may affect it differently on your computer, but it's a rough indicator as to things that can cause issues. And I think we've learned that particle effects can be pretty bad, and if you're in the Nether, it might be a good idea to turn off your particle effects, especially if you're at a blaze farm. They seem to have a massive impact on the game. But that is it for this episode of Myth Busting. I hope you have enjoyed it. As always, if you have, please do leave a like. It will always be appreciated. So thank you very much for watching, and I will catch you next time.